Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into, well, a really complex situation in the Indo-Pacific. We're looking at the connections between India, the Philippines, China, and the U.S. Yeah, it's a busy map. Our mission today, to unpack some big headlines like these new U.S. tariffs hitting India and a pretty important visit by the Philippine president to Delhi. Then we'll dig into why India and the Philippines seem to be getting closer strategically. We'll explore how they're trying to, balance China's huge influence, even though they both rely on Beijing economically, and of course, where the U.S. fits into all this high-stakes regional dance.
And just so you know where we're getting this from, we've looked at a whole range of recent news, economic reports, geopolitical analysis, trying to get you different angles on this fascinating shift.
Okay, let's start right there with the breaking news. The U.S. hitting India with more tariffs, an extra 25%.
That's right. Brings the total up to 50% on quite a few goods. It kicked in August 7th.
Wow. And there's a sort of grace period for stuff already shipped.
Yeah, a shorter one. Goods in transit until early October face a 10% tariff instead. Still significant, though.
And the official reason given is India buying a lot more Russian oil.
That's the line, yeah. I mean, the numbers are stark. Indian purchases surged from around, $8.25 billion in 2021 up to nearly $66 billion this year. A huge jump.
India's not happy, obviously. They're saying this goes completely against the spirit of the trade talks they're currently having with the U.S.
Exactly. And it's not just about the oil, is it? India has some pretty deep-seated reasons for resisting U.S. pressure, especially on things like dairy and agriculture.
Tell us about that. The dairy issue seems particularly sensitive.
Oh, absolutely. It's about protecting literally millions of small farmers, but it's also, cultural and religious. For the majority Hindu population, U.S. milk from cows fed animal-derived stuff is often unacceptable.
Right. And then there's the economic angle, too, U.S. subsidies.
Precisely. U.S. dairy is heavily subsidized, so India argues it's not a level playing field to begin with. It's tough for their small farmers to compete.
And agriculture more broadly. Similar concerns.
Very similar. Protecting the livelihoods of, I think the number is over 700 million people in the rural economy. That's the priority, shielding them from cheap, subsidized American grain imports.
Okay. And GM foods, genetically modified.
Yeah, that's another sticking point. The worry is that allowing U.S. GM products, even just for animal feed, could hurt India's own agricultural exports, particularly to places like the EU, which have really strict rules against GM.
So it's this whole tangled web economics, culture, domestic politics.
It really is.
But, it strikes me, while the U.S. is pointing fingers at India over Russian oil, doesn't the U.S. itself still import things from Russia?
That's a really important point. And yes, they do. Sources mention things like uranium, hexafluoride, palladium, fertilizers, chemicals. The U.S. continues to buy those from Russia.
And the EU.
The EU actually imported record amounts of Russian LNG, liquefied natural gas, this year. So India kind of looks at this and says, hang on a minute.
Right. India even claims the U.S. encouraged them to buy Russian oil after 2022 to keep global energy prices stable.
They do. So these tariffs feel like a bit of a policy whiplash from India's perspective. It definitely raises questions about double standards.
And all this is happening right smack in the middle of these bilateral trade agreement talks. They're trying to double trade to $500 billion by 2030.
Yeah, 5 rounds of talks already done, and a U.S. team is supposed to visit India again later this month. So the timing of these tariffs is awkward, to say the least.
Just quickly, though, India did recently drop its digital services taxes. That wasn't related to U.S. pressure, was it?
No, good clarification. That was actually part of India fulfilling its commitment to the OECD's global tax agreement, the Pillar 1 framework, different issue entirely.
Okay. So while Washington and Delhi are sorting through their issues, something else really interesting is happening. India and the Philippines seem to be forging a stronger connection.
Absolutely.
We saw the Philippine president visiting India recently, and maybe even more significantly, a joint Philippine-India patrol in the South China Sea.
Which definitely got Beijing's attention. They explicitly said they were on high alert.
So what's pulling these two nations together right now? Is it just China?
Well, China's a huge factor. We'll get to that. But there's more to it. If you look deeper, there are historical echoes, cultural links. Both countries experienced colonization, for instance.
Right. Philippines with Spain, the U.S., Japan, India with the British.
Exactly. And there's a strong shared emphasis on family, Culturally, there's a notable Indian community in the Philippines, about 63,000 people.
And language links, too.
Yeah, some interesting overlaps. Filipino has loan words from Sanskrit, like hari and raja.
Mm,
Even food, like kari kari, sounds a bit like Indian curries, right? They're these threads connecting them.
fascinating. What about the economics? Are they aligned there?
Very much so. Both are really dynamic, fast-growing economies. The Philippines looking at maybe 5.6% GDP growth this year, India maybe 6.5%. Both have positive credit outlooks.
And they're both spending big on infrastructure.
Huge investments. The Philippines has its Build Better More program, over 100 major projects planned for next year. India is pushing hard on capital expenditure, too. And India is actually a significant economic player in the Philippines already. Think about IT services companies like Infosys, TCS. They've created maybe 50,000 contact center jobs there since the year 2000.
Wow, that's substantial.
And Indian pharma companies are crucial for distributing affordable generic medicines in the Philippines. So there's real potential for more collaboration in healthcare, maybe education, too, even though their systems are different.
Okay, so you've got these historical ties, cultural connections, economic synergies. But let's get to the strategic driver, balancing China. Is that the main engine here?
I think it's fair to say it's the primary strategic driver right now, and it feels proactive, not just purely defensive. They're actively choosing to align more closely.
How does it look from the Philippines side? Because relations with China seem much cooler under President Marcos Jr. compared to Duterte.
Yeah. Oh, a night and day difference. Under Marcos Jr., you can really feel the tension. Think about the Chinese Coast Guard using water cannons against Philippine boats that happened just this past March.
Right. And didn't they pull out of some Chinese infrastructure projects?
Yes, explicitly withdrew from 3 Belt and Road Initiative railway projects late last year. That's a major signal, a real reevaluation of that economic relationship with Beijing.
Are there wider concerns about China using economic pressure?
Definitely. The memory of past banana bans, where China suddenly blocked Philippine banana imports in 2012 and 2016 during disputes, is still fresh. It showed how trade could be, well, weaponized.
And security worries, espionage.
Yes. Concerns about things like China Telecom having a big 40% stake in DITO Telecommunity, which provides internet services, including potentially to military bases. All this feeds into really high public distrust of China in the Philippines, like 91% in a recent poll, mostly tied to the South China Sea incidents.
Okay, so that's the Philippine perspective. What about India? Why are they seeking this closer tie in relation to China?
For India, it's driven by this idea of economic emancipation from China, as some put it. The trade imbalance has just exploded. It was under $1 billion back in 2000. Now it's around $85 billion in China's favor. About 15% of all Indian imports come from China.
And the border clashes change things, too.
Absolutely. The Galwan Valley incident in 2020, plus the whole COVID pandemic experience, really sharpened India's focus on the risks of being too dependent on China economically and for security. Concerns about Chinese investment in sensitive areas like tech startups grew.
Which led to their self-sufficiency drive.
Exactly. The Atmanirbhar Bharat, or Self-Sufficient India initiative, was launched specifically to build more economic independence, partly in response to these concerns about China.
Okay, so both countries have strong strategic reasons. This leads to the crucial question. How are they actually doing this balancing act? What are the concrete strategies?
Well, the most visible area is definitely security and defense cooperation. It's pretty comprehensive now.
Like what specifically?
They've finalized agreements for cooperation across all military branches, Army, Navy, Air Force. We're seeing ongoing joint naval exercises, those joint patrols in the South China Sea we mentioned.
Weapons deals. I remember hearing about missiles.
Yes, a big one. The Philippines bought the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile system from India in 2022, a $375 million deal. And now they're reportedly interested in buying more BrahMos, plus India's Akash surface-to-air missiles.
So India is becoming a serious arms supplier in the region.
It certainly looks that way, a credible non-Western alternative. They're also cooperating on maritime surveillance, training coast guards, doing joint hydrographic surveys, all aimed at boosting collective security awareness and capability.
And you mentioned India changing its stance on the South China Sea ruling.
That's huge, actually. India used to be more neutral, but now they're explicitly supporting the 2016 International Tribunal ruling that favored the Philippines against China's claims. It's a major diplomatic alignment.
Okay, so strong defense ties. What about India's economic strategy, trying to become less reliant on China? What measures have they taken?
They've done quite a bit since 2020 under that self-sufficiency banner. Tighter rules on foreign investment, especially from neighboring countries, meaning China requiring government approval first.
Banning apps, too.
Yeah, lots of Chinese apps banned over data security and espionage worries. They've excluded Chinese giants like ZTE and Huawei from their 5G network build-out, put pressure on Chinese phone makers about alleged tax evasion.
Wow. Even trying to exclude Chinese firms from government contracts.
Yes, changing public tender rules to try and disqualify Chinese companies, like in railways. And they've really restricted business visas for Chinese nationals, which has made it harder for Chinese suppliers and technicians to operate in India.
That sounds like a full court press. Has it actually worked, though? Have they managed to significantly reduce that dependence?
Well, it's complicated. Ironically, some of these measures seem to have backfired a bit, or at least caused problems for Indian industry.
Oh.
Take Apple moving iPhone production to India. That shift was reportedly slowed down because of the restrictions on bringing in necessary Chinese suppliers and technicians. One report suggested it cost India something like $15 billion in lost output and maybe 100,000 jobs in electronics between 2020 and 2023.
Ouch. So decoupling is easier said than done.
Much easier said than done. And despite the whole Make in India push since 2014, manufacturing's share of India's GDP hasn't really budged much. Still stuck around 15–16%, way short of the 25% target they'd aimed for.
Okay, that's a really important reality check on India's efforts. Now, flipping back to the Philippines, despite the strategic shift away from China under Marcos Jr., the economic ties are still there, right?
Absolutely still there. It's a real balancing act. Even with the tensions, Marcos Jr. secured over $22 billion in investment and trade deals with China just last year, in January 2023.
And they're still involved in Chinese-led initiatives?
Yes, the Philippines is a founding member of the AIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank led by China, and they still have that 2018 agreement on Belt and Road cooperation, even though they pulled out of specific projects.
But are there strings attached?
Yeah.
Concerns about the quality or terms of that Chinese investment?
Big concerns. Some analysis shows that more than half of China's $9 billion in development finance to the Philippines went through Chinese companies with, let's say, tarnished track records or serious environmental, social, or governance risks.
And how does the Filipino public feel about these projects?
Interestingly, public approval of China's leadership actually went down even as these projects rolled out. People cited worries about corruption, like with an old national broadband project, or social pushback against things like Huawei's Safe City surveillance projects.
And the loan terms weren't great either.
Apparently not always. One figure from 2019 suggested that for every dollar the Philippines got in grant aid from China, they took on over $200 in debt. So, yeah, they're engaging economically, but with their eyes wide open to the potential downsides.
Okay, let's bring the U.S. back into this picture. We've talked about tariffs, but what's the broader U.S. role in these India-Philippines dynamics? How is Washington engaging?
Well, the U.S. is definitely playing an active role, engaging deeply with both countries, but maybe in slightly different ways.
How so with India?
With India, the U.S. calls it a major defense partner. They've given India top-tier status, STA Tier I, for strategic trade. That basically makes it easier for India to get advanced U.S. tech and opens the door for more co-development, co-production of defense gear.
So helping build up India's own military capabilities.
Exactly. Helping India become more of a security provider in the region itself.
And with the Philippines, it seems like the alliance is back in full swing.
Very much so under Marcos Jr. They're reaffirming the old 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. Plus, there's the newer Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement from 2023.
That's the one giving the U.S. access to more bases.
Right. Access to 4 additional Philippine military bases, and significantly, 3 of those are up north, strategically positioned relative to Taiwan and the South China Sea.
How does China see that increased U.S. presence?
Not favorably at all. Beijing has described it quite pointedly as like quenching thirst with poison. They see it as provocative.
So the U.S. is strengthening security ties with both India and the Philippines, clearly seeing them as key partners in the Indo-Pacific. But does the economic piece lag behind the security focus?
That's a really interesting question because despite all the talk about shifting supply chains away from China and the U.S. pressure on India over Russian oil, well, remember, the U.S. itself is still buying Russian materials.
Right.
And if you look at investment flows over the last 5 years, U.S. companies have still invested almost 3 times more money in China than they have in India.
Really? that much more.
Yeah, and when companies do look to move production out of China, they often still seem to prefer other places in Southeast Asia or even Mexico over India.
So despite India's efforts and the geopolitical alignment, becoming that go-to alternative to China for global business is still, well, a work in progress.
Definitely a work in progress. It shows just how deep those economic ties with China run and how complex it is to really reroute global commerce, even when the political will seems to be there.
So wrapping this up, we've really covered a lot of ground. It's clear we're seeing India and the Philippines actively trying to reshape their positions in a really dynamic Indo-Pacific. They're leaning on each other, strengthening ties with the U.S., all while trying to manage this incredibly complex economic relationship with China.
It's a fascinating mix of history, economics, and hard-nosed strategy playing out right before our eyes. They're trying to assert their own interests, their sovereignty, in the face of huge regional pressures.
A true geopolitical deep dive.
Yeah.
Thanks for walking us through that intricate web today. And thank you for joining us on the deep dive.